I vividly remember watching the news of 9/11 on a small television in Greece. The picture was grainy, the sound was cracking, and yet the image of those towers collapsing needed no clarity to burn itself into memory. That is the nature of trauma. It imprints itself indelibly. Today, 24 years later, Americans and indeed the world will pause to reflect not only on the lives lost, but also on the profound reshaping of our political and cultural landscape, and not reshaping for the better. Almost 3,000 people died that morning: financial workers, firemen, police officers, airline crew, passengers, ordinary people who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. At the World Trade Center in New York, at the Pentagon, in the skies over Shanksville, Pennsylvania, their lives were cut short. Today, their names will be read aloud, their absence marked by silence, their memory enshrined in stone and water at memorials. But remembrance is never static. It evolves as grief hardens into history. What were the immediate decisions taken within hours of the attacks? President George W. Bush framed them as acts of war rather than crimes. Congress granted sweeping powers through emergency legislation. NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, and the groundwork for the war on terror was laid in the rubble of Manhattan. How did this change foreign policy particularly? Well, it pivoted America from post-Cold War restraint to a doctrine of preemption. Afghanistan was invaded to dismantle al-Qaeda, but Iraq became the lightning rod, justified by claims that terrorism anywhere was a threat everywhere. And that war blurred justice and vengeance, and its legacy remains contested. But I think its legacy informs, for example, the war of Israel against Gaza. And are any of these wars a necessary defence or an exploitation of national grief, where defence becomes revenge? And security around the United States and around the world became visible and constant. Airports turned into zones of suspicion, surveillance expanded, laws such as the Patriot Act normalised the monitoring of citizens. For Muslims and people of Middle Eastern heritage, the attacks brought not just tragedy, but years of prejudice and suspicion. The wound of that morning has widened into the politics of division. New York went from indestructible backdrop to haunted subject. Films, novels, memorials attempted to absorb trauma, but also to project resilience. Yet militarism seeped into popular culture too. Superhero films, disaster narratives, patriotic dramas all fed into a sense of a world perpetually at war, perpetually under threat. There are lessons, I think, that can be learnt from this period and from the last 24 years. First, that fear corrodes freedom. In trying to defend democracy, governments have risked undermining it. Second, that wars outlive grief. Afghanistan became America's longest war, only for the Taliban to return in 2021. And third, that memory is fragile. A whole generation now knows 9/11 only as history, sometimes mythologized, sometimes blurred. They know 9/11 simply as a form of mathematics. And here lies the paradox of remembrance. To mark the anniversary rightly is to honour lives lost without allowing the deaths to justify endless war or permanent suspicion. To remember is not only to mourn, but to resist the corrosion of liberty, the dehumanization of communities, the exploitation of grief for political ends. 24 years on, the question is not whether we remember 9/11, for we clearly do. The question is whether we have learned from it. Have we grasped that security without freedom is merely another kind of prison, that grief can never be sufficient guide to foreign policy, that unity so briefly visible in the days after the attacks must be renewed every day in the politics of peace? Today, as the bells toll and the names are read, we are asked to carry memory with responsibility, and to remember is not to be trapped in the past, it's to ensure that the future doesn't repeat its most bitter lessons.